Such structures are very powerful. These reasons have to do with the very new and very challenging targets governments have to address today. It has been said this morning why it was becoming particularly difficult. It's maybe not more complex than it used to be before, but the awareness of the complexity has grown. And as a result, public policies have to take into account a number of dimensions, long-term, medium-term, cross-sectorial dimensions, which they could not disregard but devote less attention to previously. We've been involved since quite some time with Sarah and her team and Elsa Piliszowski's team, and what the governance directorate at the OECD is doing and what the team with the Centers of Government project is doing is tremendously helpful to us and also extremely stimulating. So I'm very happy to see my friends of the OECD here and to get to know the people at PlanAPP. I'll very briefly tell you a few words about Stratégie because there isn't any reason why you should be aware of what we are actually. And then I'll go into the heart of the matter. We're an organization that's a distant successor to the Comissário au Plan that was created in the mid-40s after the Second World War in the context of the Reconstruction. The legal framework has changed a little over time in 2007 and in 2013, but it matters less than the change in the environment. It started as something that was very close to planning, and as economies and states left more place, more room of a maneuver for market mechanisms, it gradually morphed into something that was closer to a think tank. We're now in a phase where we see a growing appetite by government for benefiting from analysis that try and look to the medium and long term and try to be more consistent across fields, exactly what PlanAPP is, I believe, going to address. And we have very, very similar roadmaps in that respect, and that is where we are moving. And so we hope to be somewhere near to one another in the next few months or years. What we handle is a limited scope but broad enough to get us busy. We do a lot about economy with a particular focus on productivity. We work a lot on employment issues with a focus on skills, competencies, soft skills, and how they can be an asset or a drawback to economic growth. We work on social policies, but the main driving force over the last few years has been sustainable development and particularly climate change. We've invested a lot in technical issues such as carbon pricing or the like, and we're actively involved in a number of projects that have to do with climate change. Roughly half what we do is directly the result of a member of government or the Prime Minister's office asking us to do a report on this or that issue. And that includes something that has become very substantial. And once again, it's a common point with PlanAPP, which is policy assessment. Assessment of public policies. We devote roughly 1/3 of our working time to that area. The other part of the program that we are, free to determine, in fact, is the result of a very long consultation process where we see the trade unions, the employers' unions, all the major administrations that have to do something, that have something to do with the areas we're involved with. We also meet with the heads of the National Assembly, the Senate, and the Conseil économique et social, broadly speaking, we try to make sure that major public policy stakeholders are aware of the type of issues we're considering to study and can voice their interest for this or that area. And it can result in reshuffling priorities, adding new items, getting items off the list if nobody shows an interest. So even if it is technically part of our program that we take the initiative of, it is, as a practical matter, something that is very much debated with the stakeholders. We're a small group of people. We have 45 what I would call front office people. We share the support functions with other institutions, so that's roughly a 15 full-time equivalent. So roughly altogether, let's say 60 people equivalent, and a budget that is around 10 million euros. So that in a nutshell is what we are. And it's been a very busy period with an interesting period for us, which is that during electoral periods we can't publish. And so we published enormously before the presidential election. We're publishing very actively because starting this Friday we can't publish until the end of the parliament election, the general election. When I started reviewing what PlanAPP was doing, it was very clear that we had many major topics of interest that were topics of joint interest. I'll just focus on three. One is, of course, ecological transition and the challenge of getting rid of carbon gases or the emission of carbon gases. Our two countries are very involved with that. The situations are quite different. You have a very high percentage of renewable energy, basically wind and hydro. We have a massive contribution of nuclear energy to power. So the starting points are different, but the result is that both countries should be in a position to curb the emissions that are linked to the power system reasonably rapidly. But we know that if we want to do that successfully and to also curb the other primary energy sources that are hydrocarbons, we'll have to invest a lot and people will have to change their habits. The economic choices are complex and we're very aware of that. But it's even more complex to try and assess the social consequences and the social acceptability of measures you have to take when you want people who drive a car to pollute less, when you want agriculture to pollute less, and how do you curb the consumption of beef? It's an easy problem to state. It's not a very easy problem to solve. And so we're aware of a situation where most of our fellow citizens are aware of the climate change issue. Most will voice a sort of approval in principle for policies that try and handle it. And many of them will vigorously oppose the actual implementation. This is a gap that is one of the most difficult situations to handle today in public policies. And this gap is really about how do we make the ecological transition to be socially fair. General ideas have been floated, such as allocating to those in need the receipts of carbon taxes or ETS or the like. None of them has proved to work on a significant scale for the time being. And we are now at a point in time where very basic needs, how do you heat your house, how do you feed your family, how do you go from one place to another, what do you find in the shops, and how do you do shopping, is it online or physical? All of this has carbon gas impacts, and we have to monitor an evolution that has to become more and more rapid. There is a degree of support that comes from the fact that a spectacular increase of rare climate accidents is focusing the attention of citizens in Europe on how urgent it is, but that doesn't. It's not enough for practical solutions to be available. Sorry. when we stumble on how do we take the decisions, then we see that the democratic process of hammering out these policies is very debated and very difficult. To put it in a nutshell, what we know today is that once a member of parliament is elected, he benefits during some time from the mandate that the voters have given to her or to him. And then this has to be periodically renewed, and this pressure on remaining a legitimate lawmaker during the whole duration of the mandate involves an increasing contribution of citizens through citizen forum, through consultation processes and the like. And one of the biggest challenges I think most pluralist democracies are facing today is, how do you make this work together? How do you consult and then write a law and vote a law? We've had an experience in France that was very frustrating in a way. We had a national convention on climate change, 150 people, it lasted months, they invested a lot of time and energy, and then they were disappointed when all their ideas were not directly transformed into legislation, which could never have been the case, particularly since their mandate didn't include taking into account the economic, social, fiscal consequences of what they were advocating. So they had been put in a place where they were structurally irresponsible. But the mandate hadn't been completely clear at the beginning, and so that generated a lot of frustration, which is perfectly understandable. And as a result, this process gave a bad name to citizens' consultation. We now have to reinvent citizens' consultation in a way that fits well with lawmaking, and that is quite a challenging thing. We've had a particularly spectacular case of that with the Gilets jaunes. I don't know if you remember that episode, which was a very good television, but also a very strong indication of how deep the conflicts were running through French society, how angry people were. It was an occasion to understand and to vividly touch how many people were angry, and at the recent presidential election, without making a political comment, you can say that roughly 1 out of 2 voters expressed a vote whose driving force was anger. And that goes together with what was discussed this morning, distrust, diffidence, and there's no easy way to handle these issues for a government. But it can be a serious drawback to public policy making. We've just published a report where we try and make a few propositions on how to handle this. On the lawmaking side, basically what we say is we have to consult with citizens, we have to do it in an orderly way, we have to do it on the basis of a political mandate that has been clearly given by the voters at the beginning, and then we have to leave ample room for debate. We have to involve MPs in the process of consulting citizens. It shouldn't be viewed as something that is separate from the lawmaking process. And then at a point in time, the lawmakers have to take the topic in hand, and they have to take their decisions, and they have to have sufficient time and means to take a decision that is debated at length. Debate is an essential part of democracy. It is true for citizens' assemblies, it is true, of course, for parliaments, but parliaments have agendas that are so tense that often debate is less than what we would expect it to be, and that also generates frustrations. On the executive side, what we believe is that we would want to have a few simple rules of thumb, and it is easier to organize them around climate change. There are very strong legal reasons for that. Climate change is embedded in a number of legislation, international agreements, European commitments, and in France there is a portion that is linked to the constitution of our key texts that directly is an environment charter. And the constitutional judge makes sure that it is part of what it calls the constitutionality block. So we have very strong legal foundings to act. And what we see is that you can get pro-climate change legislation through Parliament, and it becomes more difficult after. And the executive branch's responsibility is to find the proper solutions. If we want to do that properly, I think we need basically a few very simple things. We need politicians who are determined that it will happen. It will not work if there isn't a strong commitment from the senior politicians, and that would be the President and the Prime Minister in France, and all the authorities that have the driving force on political life. The second thing is we probably need to give a special legal status to things that have to do with climate change. You cannot be in a position where at the spur of a moment you can change views on climate change and go back to pre-climate change era legislation. You have to make sure that it's incremental and that it's difficult to change. That might require some degree of either an amendment to the Constitution or what we call an organic law, but we will need to have something very strong in the legislation if we want to be successful. And then we're pleading for the organization of a unit at the Prime Minister's office that would be in charge of assessing the consistency over time and across sectors of the various policies that are being considered. This is very much in the public debate since a few weeks. We happen to have our report ready just in time, so we are actively taking part in that debate. We believe that something will come out of it. We don't know yet what will happen. As you are maybe aware, we have a new Prime Minister since only 2 days, and we'll see what the decisions are. But I think the intuition we have and the proposition we're making are very convergent with what PlanApp's roadmap is. And so I look forward to having many further occasions to cooperate with PlanApp. And I thank you for your attention.